Okay, we are now live. Well, we're gathering our attendees, policymakers, civil society leaders from all over the world, and influencers, members of various governments. As we do that, I have a poll we can start with here. Let me go ahead and launch the poll. We have two questions. Maybe you could just tell us, where are you from? And what role do you have in the area of education? So we're gathering our attendees. We have almost 200 registered attendees from all over the world. I expect we'll see pretty much every continent represented here in many, many different roles. Thank you all for attending and joining us this morning. We'll wait about one more minute and then we'll start the event.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello, Secretary Gondra. Thank you very much. We started the event. We're live. Thank you for joining. And let me go ahead and start. I'd like to thank everyone. Thank you so much. If you're a panelist, you can go ahead and mute until it's your turn to speak.
Yes.
Welcome everyone for joining in the Global Policymakers Forum on Homeschooling in the Pandemic.
Cool.
Let's start again. Thank you for joining the Global Policymakers Forum on Homeschooling in the Pandemic. My name is Michael Donnelly. I'm a senior counsel for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association and a founding board member of the Global Home Education Exchange Council, which was founded on the premise that every family and every child have a fundamental human right to choose homeschooling, no matter why or how they choose to do it. My connection to homeschooling is as an advocate and scholar, but personally, I'm a parent of 7 homeschooled children, and I want to thank my wife publicly for the work she does educating our children and all the homeschooling parents who are listening and who will listen. I'm very grateful to our speakers who have volunteered their time today to help policymakers and civil society leaders to grapple with the issue of home education and the pandemic. But for this global pandemic, it would not have been possible to assemble such a distinguished group of speakers. At the height of this global pandemic, over 1.5 billion children in 190 countries were affected by school closures. Suddenly, everyone was trying to do school at home. School systems have tried to cope by using distance learning and other methods, but that's not the same as parent-directed home education, where families choose their own curriculum. They set their own schedule and move at a pace commensurate with the age, ability, conditions, and interests of each child. As a result of expected new school health protocols and concerns about health risks and other reasons, large numbers of parents everywhere are now saying they are more likely to homeschool. The numbers are quite astounding. Several polls have been conducted in the United States showing anywhere from 15 to 40% of parents are planning to keep their children home from school. In the United States alone, this could mean 8 to 20 million more children homeschooling. Even if the numbers of other countries are lower, there seems every possibility that homeschooling could increase by tens, if not hundreds of millions in just the next year. And even if many return their children to school when things get to normal, which we all hope they'll get back to normal very soon, it seems likely that many will continue homeschooling and that this pandemic may have the possibility to transform the face of education. What does this mean for education, for governments, for families, for children, for schools? Policymakers are struggling to keep up with the demands of this pandemic. It seems that parents taking on this responsibility to educate large numbers of children could be an answer to some potential problems. With less children in schools, social distancing will be easier. The economic impact of the pandemic response will certainly reduce tax receipts for governments. With fewer children in schools, demand for money for public schools will decrease, possibly saving state resources. Although the United States has the world's largest homeschooling community with nearly 2.5 or more million children, other countries like Russia and Brazil, and we have policymakers from Russia and Brazil joining us today, have fast growing communities. In some countries, homeschooling is severely restricted, in a few. In others, it's not yet legally recognized. It seems that moving forward, all countries should acknowledge homeschooling as a legitimate option and support all families who choose to do it. A few administrative details as we begin. We do have one Russian speaker who will be translated. You should see a translation option on your menu bar. If that doesn't work, we'll do an asynchronous translation. If you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to chat, but do please give your utmost attention to our distinguished speakers. And this event is being broadcast live on Facebook and YouTube and will be available in various forms after it's finished. I want to thank our speakers again, and let us begin. Our first speaker is Dr. Joseph Murphy, who is Associate Dean and Professor at Vanderbilt University. He has served in virtually every leadership position in public schools and is a past vice president and fellow of the AERA, the American Education Research Association. He's edited many books, over 30, I think. Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, including, very importantly, the 2012 comprehensive literature review titled Homeschooling in America, Capturing and Assessing the Movement. Joe, please share with us. You're unmuted now, Joe. Go right ahead. Yes, I can hear you fine.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for being here. I want to start with one comment. We need to think long-term about what homeschooling would mean for your country or your state, because we could do something and in 15 years look back and say we've created another crisis. So think forward as well as just solving the problem. We don't want to create another problem, we solve this problem. I agree with Michael. I started in on this very simple reason. People were telling me that parents shouldn't homeschool their kids and that kids were not doing well. And I said, this doesn't sound right. So I spent 2 or 3 years looking into it, and those claims are inadequate at best, okay? So I want to talk about 4 things very quickly in my overview. Why are we here in this state we're in now? The numbers and growth, as Michael introduction, and then the impact of the movement, okay? So that's where we're headed. The reason we're here really doesn't have a lot to do with the virus, or right now at least has a lot to do with the virus. But you need to understand it's a bigger movement than that. What we're finding is that we are in the era of a major world change in the economy, in politics, and in society. And it's those forces that have pushed homeschooling onto center stage, and they're not going anywhere. They're beginning to increase. So when I say that, I mean from 1920 through about 2020, the industrial era, schools were pretty much run by professional people and by government. And people began to say, you know, that's too limited. We need a bigger say. And you've got the introduction of parents directly, and you have the introduction with markets. And those 2 forces, along with the other 2 forces, are really reconceptualizing education so it may look quite different in the next century than what we've had in the past. And I think that's a really important reason. We have parents who are much more interested based on religion. That's how it got started in this country. The people began to homeschool because society pushed religion out of public schooling, and parents weren't happy. Some parents weren't happy about that. There was also a belief that kids were getting less than safe care at many schools. They were bullied and other things. And then there was also a really growing movement that parents and children needed to be together, not separated for 3/4 of the day, and that the goal of parents was to keep the family together. So you begin to get these big changes that began to push homeschooling as a very legitimate alternative Because in 1979, if you homeschooled your kid here, police would have been at your door and you would have been arrested and you would have been taken to jail. That's how far we've come. Okay, so big shift. Michael talked about it. There's just more people than we know what to do with their homeschooling, and we're struggling with how to deal with that. As I said earlier, the homeschooling movement in this country started with the church, and people began to look to churches to help them figure out what to do. And they did. And what they found is churches would set up activities, do all sorts of things, take kids on field trips, set up algebra class on Thursday night in somebody's home, and physics class at somebody's home in the afternoon, on another afternoon. So you had this large movement begin, and it moved away from just relying on the church to relying on the whole society to provide the education. And what that means is many, many mothers did not have to stay home and be with their child every day, all day long. So you began to set up a pattern where the kids were homeschooled, but they were homeschooled in a variety of places in addition to the home, which meant that parents could both be employed. So that was a huge shift that's just happened. And you also see here now, at least, and it is the mixture of public and homeschooling. So when it started, homeschooling people hated the public school people, and the public school people hated the homeschool people, right? And they didn't even look at each other. That went on for a short amount of time, and then they realized they're both in the same game. We should play together. And you see, in this country, you see a fair number of homeschooling kids that go back to public schools for a specific subject area, like algebra in the 9th grade or whatever. And they now are on the sports teams and other co-curricular activities if they want to be. So the breakdown between the home and the school has taken place, and you see a variety of places where students are schooled when they're homeschooled, not just in their own home. That's been a very significant shift. So then that takes me to the end, which is the impacts. As I said earlier, when anything starts, everybody here assumes it's the devil appearing or the Lord appearing, right? And they act accordingly. Well, when homeschooling arrived, it was the devil. And the assumptions were it would work, it was bad, kids would be harmed, society would be destroyed, there would be no social relationships. Everything that could go wrong was brought up. And what we found since then is that if you just look at academic growth, we don't see any evidence that these students are damaged academically at all. They do as well or better. I don't want to overstate this case, but they're not harmed. That was the big issue. And it looks like they may be even doing better than some of their peers in regular schools. And that was a pretty big finding. Social development was a second major concern, that these kids would become social isolates. They wouldn't have friends. They would stay in their home until they died, and the world would be troubled. That is not true. These kids, through the places that they get their schooling, churches, civil associations, and other places, have more contact with adults and related people to grow. And what social development actually means, they get it firsthand. They're not reading it. And that's been a really important finding, a really important outcome, I think. And then self-concept, there was a concern, of course, that the students would develop dysfunctional self-concept and lack of efficacy. And that's just not been true at all. They again, they do at least as well and oftentimes better. So the future, we need people in government roles particularly, and in professional roles, and in market roles. Market has a lot to do with homeschooling in this country. To understand what is going on, why it is going on, what's actually happening to children, and what they can do to be part of that movement to help children grow, we help society develop, and help the world be a better place. And I think we can do that. I think that's your job. You have, of course, the really tough part of that. You're actually in a crisis, and that makes it palpable for everybody. But remember, the crisis did not start this, and it's not going to end if the crisis went away tomorrow. It's an international movement of great significance that we need to keep on the table. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Murphy. Excellent remarks, and I appreciate your being here very much. Our next speaker, United States Senator Ted Cruz, represents 28 million Texans. He is a passionate fighter for limited government and economic freedom, has authored 39 legislative measures signed into law, including expanding 529 college savings accounts to allow parents to save K-12 public, private, and religious education to pay for expenses. Senator Cruz is a graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School, a former law clerk to Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and former Solicitor General of Texas. Senator Cruz, it's such a privilege to have you with us today, sir. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning. It is great to be with you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be part of this discussion, and thank you for engaging on the very important issues surrounding homeschooling. It's a little hard to imagine if we were to think back 6 months ago, if someone were to suggest that every parent in America and many people across the globe would suddenly and instantaneously all be homeschooling. That would be hard to imagine. And yet a global pandemic has put a great many parents in the position of suddenly having their kids at school, doing distance learning to be sure, and not full on homeschooling. But I can say, as I sit here from my living room in Houston, Texas, that for the past 2.5 months, I've been working from home. My wife Heidi's been working from home, and our 9-year-old daughter and 12-year-old daughter have both been doing distance learning from home, one at the dining room table, the other up in her room. And that has been an extraordinary external stimulus that has impacted the world in many respects, but it's impacted education. And obviously a great many of the people who are distance learning now involuntarily, when the pandemic subsides and we defeat the virus, which we will choose to return to whatever schooling options they were using. But I'm going to suggest this also presents an opportunity. When you have tens of millions of people suddenly needing to help educate their students at home, you have an opportunity for people to, number one, experience the demands it takes in terms of time and energy and love and trying to figure out third grade or sixth grade math, none of which are easy, even for those who do it professionally full time. We also have an opportunity in terms of the technology that's being developed. I do think the consequences of this crisis is that we're going to see more and more distance learning tools, more and more classes online, more and more e-commerce. 6 months ago, we would not likely have been doing a Zoom conference call. This now, I don't know about your day, but I think I've got about 7 of these Zoom conference calls, one after the other. That's going to be an ongoing change going forward. I think that's a positive opportunity for homeschooling in terms of bringing resources to parents and kids. There's also a threat. Many of those in power, many academic elites view homeschooling as a fundamental threat to their power. Just in the last couple of months, there was a cover story in Harvard University's magazine by law professor Elizabeth Bartholet. I'm an alumnus of Harvard Law School, and I have to admit I'm embarrassed of the institution where I did my legal training, because this article drips with condescension and drips with contempt for homeschoolers. The article all but describes any parent who would choose to homeschool their children as an ignorant, bigoted, racist rube who believes in crazy religious ideas. And by the way, by crazy religious ideas, what the article really says is who believes in God. Sadly, many of our elite academic institutions at the university level have taken the enlightened view that if any person is a person of faith, they're obviously an idiot. That is something to beware of, because the premise of this article is that parents don't have the right to train their children, that the government has the right to take the children and train the children and teach the children and make sure they don't learn those crazy views of the parents. And I have to say, one of the fundamental liberties that's protected under the United States Constitution, but it is also a fundamental liberty of mankind, is the right of parents to raise their children. I believe most parents love their kids, and it's a question of fundamental liberty to be able to raise and teach and train your children to the best of your ability. Homeschooling is not a choice for everyone. It is an enormous commitment of time. The homeschoolers whom I know, and I have many dear friends who have schooled, devote years and years of their life around the clock. They pour in love and prayers and work. And the kids come out, we just heard a minute ago, but the kids that come out through homeschooling over and over again are achieving academically at higher levels than the kids who are using more traditional schooling routes. And so I think we should recognize the threat, because what was so clear about this Harvard article last couple of months was the arrogant condescension and the fear that parents might have some power to train their own children. That danger we should be well aware of, but it's not a pretty look. It is, I've tried actually to highlight that, to show the contempt they have for parents to rear our children. Let me say also that there are opportunities. The biggest legislative accomplishment that I have been able to achieve in my 8 years in the U.S. Senate is legislation expanding educational choice. And in particular, this was in 2017, it was during the tax cut debate. I introduced an amendment to expand what are called College 529 savings plans. These are tax advantage savings plans where parents and grandparents, they can save their own money for college expenses, and they can grow in a tax advantage way. I introduced an amendment that expanded College 529 saving plans to now include K through 12 education, to include public school, private school, parochial school, religious school. Every parent can save up to $10,000 per child per year of their own money in a tax advantage account and use it for educational expenses. Now, as I drafted the amendment, I included homeschoolers in there, that homeschoolers incur lots of expenses and they ought to be able to save in a tax advantaged account. That was in the amendment, and I will tell you, it was unfortunate to see what happened. Senate Democrats raised a procedural objection, and I won't get into the arcane Senate procedure, but they had a narrow procedural objection to homeschoolers and to children with disabilities. And they went to the Senate parliamentarian, and I went and argued against them and fought. In fact, one of the arguments Senate Democrats had against the entire amendment, they tried to get the entire amendment thrown out, is they said the problem is this will be too popular. Parents will like this too much, so we can't do it because it undermines our control over education. Well, they didn't succeed in throwing out the entire amendment, but they did sadly succeed in throwing out homeschoolers, carving them out of the amendment, and carving out children with disabilities who need special therapies and assistance. Both of them were cruelly carved out. That bill ended up passing on the United States Senate floor by a vote of 50 to 50, evenly divided, which meant the Vice President of the United States had to come down to the Senate floor at 1 a.m. It was a late night vote, and cast the tie-breaking vote. And with that, we passed the most far-reaching federal school choice legislation that has ever passed into law. And so for the policymakers from other countries, I want to encourage you, one of the tools that is potent, I continue working to expand 529s to include homeschoolers, to provide new tools, but allowing people to have tax advantaged accounts so that they can save the resources to devote to education is a powerful, powerful tool. And I want to encourage the policymakers on this account to take advantage of that tool where they can.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. We certainly appreciate your support of homeschooling in the United States, and we'll be there to support you next time you get a chance to run this 529 legislation, which we do think is a fair thing. Everyone should be treated the same. Thank you for doing that. Our next speaker is Senator Margarita Pavlova, who is a senator of the Russian Federation. She's previously served as governor of the Chelyabinsk region and a member of the State Duma. Before public service, she was a television correspondent and served as a regional commissioner for the rights of the child and human rights, and is a graduate of Chelyabinsk State Academy. Now, this is the first time that I have ever used the translation function on a Zoom feature. Zoom is getting better. They're making changes. They're getting more secure. And so forgive me if it doesn't work. We have a translator, Alexei Komov. Alexei, you should be able to speak, and everyone should be able to, at the bottom of their menu bar, select English if they want to hear in English and Russian if they want to hear in Russian. So let's give this a shot. Senator Pavlova, you can unmute and start speaking, and hopefully this will work. Thank you for being with us. You can translate in real time, Alexei.
Приветствую вас как сенатор Совета Федерации России, как гражданин, как мама своих замечательных детей. И, безусловно, я разделяю ценности.
Yes, it's working, Alexei. You can go ahead and do it in real time.
Я закрыл взгляд Академии. Спасибо организаторам такой прекрасный повод, встречи, знакомства. Развитие семейного образования в России в 1992 году. Я научила стать важным личным элементом современного российского пространства образования. Мы видим, что все большее количество российских семей выбираются с книгами образования, интересными каждым годом растет. Современный период борьбы с коронавирусом и всеобщей изоляции, внимание к семейному образованию все надо. На мой взгляд, родители стали задавать себе правильные вопросы, как учить, как дать ребенку больше знаний, как сделать его успешным и счастливым, достаточно. Какова роль все-таки родителей в образовании? Могут ли эти родители успешных педагогов? Сейчас семейное обучение очень динамично пошло в систему российского образования. В первую очередь оно было рассчитано на тех, кто воспитывает детей по индивидуальной жизненной траектории. Усиливает правительство, ради которых не предлагается ходить в обычную школу. Это все интеллектуально одаренные детей, безусловно, и более инвалидности. На мой взгляд, семейное образование в Российской Федерации — это очень правильный баланс семьи, ставящий приоритет питания, оценка личности. Семейное обучение — это не только желание родителей создать приятные условия. И я считаю, что это имплантирующие самого государства, и формирование государства. Мы делаем такой вклад в внедрение традиционных семей. Я считаю, что это очень форма обучения. Нужно обеспечить регулярные условия для их полноценного развития и в нашей стране есть. Причем самое важное в этом процессе, я считаю, действительно голос коммерчества, реальный потребность, интерес. Я считаю, что Россия — это уникальная страна, которая защищает право родителей образования, и я надеюсь, что наша страна поделит более национальной. Лично я планирую смысл своего жизни.
Well, thank you, Senator Pavlova, very much for your remarks. And I don't think I can let this moment pass. As a former Army officer in the United States Army, I trained to meet soldiers of the Soviet Union on the battlefield, and I've met many of them over the years as I've traveled to Russia occasionally. And I find it just incredible that we have a senator from the Russian Federation and Senator Cruz here talking about the same thing. Some would accuse us of colluding, but I guess if we're colluding for homeschooling, that's okay. Maybe, I hope. So thank you, Alexei, for your excellent translation work. Our next speaker is Inga Yumasheva, who is a deputy of the State Duma representing the Republic of Bashkortostan. She serves on the International Affairs Committee, a graduate of Ufa State Oil Technical University and the Diplomatic Academy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and was also a keynote speaker at the third Global Home Education Conference, which was held in Moscow in 2018. Deputy Yumasheva, the floor is yours.
Dear organizers and participants of the Global Policymakers Forum on Home Education, thank you for the invitation to participate in this very important meeting. Indeed, the subject of homeschooling is becoming more and more discussed in Russia. About 10% of our school children are taught at home, and according to forecasts, the figure will grow. In the past, as we know, in many countries, home education was a traditional educational practice. Then it moved to the background, but today it is considered a serious alternative to the public school education. Status of the issue in Russia. In Russia, homeschooling is allowed, and opportunities to implement it are quite flexible. Our legislation ensures the right of parents or legal representatives to provide a child with a preschool and general education in a family, as well as the right of such a child to continue education in an educational institution at any stage of education. At the same time, general education in Russia is available for everyone and is free of charge. Briefly, we can highlight the following features of home education in Russia. The first one is a form of education is chosen by the parent, taking into account the child's opinion. A child is to pass a test in an educational body. And the third is that parents are also responsible for making good progress. So what are the issues and the concerns in this case? It should be mentioned that some parents and experts note a number of difficulties that accompany home education in our country. They can be divided into the following categories. The first one is the level of education in the family. Parents who have chosen the home education for their children are responsible for their child's learning of general education programs and are to possess knowledge of the school curriculum and psychological competencies. The second is interpersonal interaction. First, home education can result in a problem of socialization of a child who stays out of full communication with other children of his or her age. And secondly, today, home education is actively implemented via online education. A child doesn't go to school, but is taught by tutors remotely. The predominance of this form of learning in the educational process, the exclusion of a big share of live communication between a teacher and a learner, affects negatively the development of a child's personality. In our opinion, the issue mentioned above require the authorities' attention and possible legal settlement. Our major goal is giving the opportunity to choose an alternative form of general education and the opportunity to combine different forms of education if it is consistent with the needs of a child. Home education, unlike school one, has a number of advantages, the main of which is its contribution to the preservation of spiritual and moral traditions in a family relations and healthy upbringing of the younger generation. I think it is important to stress that home education is a modern form of education that matches the trend of our time to use an individual rather than a mass approach to a person. In contrast to school education, home one allows taking into account the personal and cognitive capacities of a particular child, and in accordance with them to choose the form of material presentation that would be most effective and interesting for the learner. The educational process in a family should follow the school curriculum, but it can rely on alternative educational resources that are rarely used in school. For example, documentaries, interactive platforms, video lectures, and many, many others. So homeschooling makes possible to focus on a specific area of knowledge the child is interested in. In Russia, tests on vocational guidance for children are conducted from the age of 10. It means that at this age, it is possible to estimate certain abilities in a child. Home education lets take these abilities into account in process of forming the educational process. In modern, fast-changing world, our modern fast-changing world shows us the effectiveness of the combination of different forms of activity and different views. So home education based on live communication between close people can be an addition to a major form of child's education. We should keep the availability of various forms of education and develop opportunities to combine them. And all this should base on the interests of children. To summarize, I believe that home education in the modern world should be organized on the following principles. The first one is the priority of a family in a child's education. which allows parents to build an educational strategy of learning independently. A child's education should be determined primarily by his or her interests, individual preferences, but not just the school curriculum. And the main thing in home education is to maintain interest in knowledge and develop child's ability to learn information without assistance. So, dear participants, on May the 24th, 3 days ago, the 80th anniversary of the birth of Joseph Brodsky was celebrated. And he is the famous Russian and American poet, essayist, and the Nobel Prize winner in literature. He finished just 7 grades of secondary school, but this didn't prevent him from becoming not only an outstanding poet, but also an educated person. So there are many such examples in history, and they allow us to think once again that the main idea is not getting a school certificate, but a desire to learn and enjoy learning without sacrificing the time spent with the family. So I wish everyone who chooses a home education for their children more energy and enthusiasm, and let this choice lead you to the results you want, and let it be only for the good of your children. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Deputy Umasheva. What an eloquent articulation of homeschooling. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your remarks.
Was it okay that you hear me?
We
Yeah?
heard you perfectly.
Was it possible? I was trying to make it a little bit
It was-
slower.
No, you were absolutely fantastic. Your English is incredible, and you came across loud and clear. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you so very much. Our next speaker is a member of the European Parliament. Joachim Kuhs represents the Baden-Württemberg area of Germany. Prior to his election, he served 25 years as a registrar in the Baden-Württemberg judiciary and was a state auditor. Herr Kuhs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. As a father of 10 and a grandfather of 13, my main concern and task as member of the European Parliament and member of the Federal Board of the Alternative for Germany, the strongest opposition party in the German Bundestag, is to strengthen the natural family consisting of mother, father, and children. The family is the foundation of our society and culture. Marriage gives the family reliability and stability. It should be a central task of the state to protect and promote marriage and family. I firmly reject attempts to weaken marriage and the family through the so-called gender mainstreaming or other ideologically motivated interventions, with the intention to educate people and thus patronizing them. Improvement of education for our children and grandchildren is and was a high priority for my beloved wife Ingrid and me. This includes our commitment to parents' free choice between homeschooling, private schooling, or public schooling. Even if you do not accept the parents' right to educate their own children, there are many good and objective reasons for homeschooling, like autism, fear of school, bullying, or traumatized children. In Germany, the state is tough in these cases and forces children into schools as well. The false doctrine of the presence of children in school buildings could not be brought down in Germany so far, even with strong reference to these problems. This policy is, of course, against the parents' right to educate their children, against our Christian roots, and against the principle of freedom. But in Germany, there are only few people who care about these things. The biggest problem homeschooling parents have in Germany is, and you will not believe it, that homeschooling is completely prohibited. It's forbidden. There are fathers and mothers who get imprisoned because of homeschooling. Other families emigrate from Germany to other countries to teach their children at home. Parents' personal liberty rights apply in Germany compared to other Western states rather little. There are constitutional rights of parents, but they are not applying for homeschooling. Our constitutional rights are generally under constant attack by socialist forces. Just recently, our party AfD has started a campaign for which I contributed a video statement in order to help to protect the German constitution on this matter. It's very important. And the Corona crisis would have become a perfect opportunity for Germany to consider homeschooling positively, since 90% of all German pupils stayed at home with their parents. Surprisingly, even single-parent families did not face particular problems with educating their children at home. It would be a great loss after Corona to miss such opportunity politically, economically, and spiritually. As a committed Christian, I look forward to a deeper cooperation with all of you. Germany is not even a developing country when it comes to homeschooling. Courageous organizations such as the Federal Association for Freedom of Education in Germany need our prayers, your expertise, and financial support for the implementation and legalization of homeschooling in Germany. Together, and with the help of God, we are going to accomplish great things. Thank you, and may God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Herr Kuz. Thank you for your remarks. I find it particularly helpful and appropriate to have a German here talking about the need for the legalization of homeschooling in Germany. And
Yes.
I do hope that your fellow policymakers in Germany will listen to you and that there might be some action on that front in the near future. Thank you for your very kind remarks. What I'd like to do now, we are a little bit ahead of schedule and we have a few comments, but not a lot of questions. And I do want to go ahead and introduce our next speaker from South Africa. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You just give me a second. I've got too many things open on my on my screen. Where is this? There we go. Miss Nomsa Tarabella Marchesi is a member of the South African Parliament and is the Shadow Minister of Basic Education. She serves on the Committee on Basic Education and believes that quality education is vital to creating economic opportunities and regularly engages with the home education movement. She's a graduate of the University of the Free State.
I don't think we can hear her.
Mike, we can't hear it.
Just a moment. Regrettably, the South African Parliament called NOMSA into session and she was not available, but she did send us this recording. And now that I'm sharing the computer sound, you should be able to hear it.
Good morning. My name is Nomsa Machezi. I am the Shadow Minister of Basic Education for the official opposition party, which is the Democratic Alliance in South Africa. I'm so honored and privileged to be part of this forum to talk about where South Africa is in terms of homeschooling. As some of you might know, South Africa has had a very difficult history, particularly if you look at homeschooling. Prior to 1994 and post the apartheid dispensation, homeschooling was outlawed, which meant that should a parent decide to homeschool their child, they will be prosecuted. And for that matter, one family, the parents of that family, they were sent to jail, as ridiculous as that might sound. But that was our reality at the time. So what happened was there were activists that decided to work together with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association from the USA that basically worked tirelessly to ensure that homeschool it is legalized in South Africa. And with us...
So we lost the share?
No, it was sharing, but it was sharing your entire desktop.
Oh,
So
thank you. Let me get her back on here.
on the legislation and also the reform of our constitution within our constitutional court, which led to the inclusion of homeschooling within our School Education Act of 1996. And from that time, we saw a number of families that were opting for homeschooling for various reasons. I have to say that some of the reason was the uncertainty of the new dispensation. People were sort of like, they felt that they needed to be more in control of the education of their children, and also from the fact that there was exorbitant prices that they had to pay for private education. And over the years, we have seen quite a number of parents that are opting for homeschooling because of the violence that they've seen, that they're constantly seeing at school, and also the quality of education, which has always been so much questionable within our sector, and also in the country at large. But with homeschooling, the South African census of 2010 has shown that there are now thousands of families who are opting for homeschool. And it comes from all different races. It's not more, one race opting for that. You're seeing different races, different ethnic groups, and different classes of people are looking at homeschooling as an alternative way of educating children. But what we have seen now recently in 2017, the Department of Basic Education has sought to introduce a new regulatory environment, and which is the Basic Education Law Amendment, which was put for publication. And fortunately, many, I still believe that we could have received more comments from the publication. But what happened was, like, we received about 5,500 comments on the bill, because many people felt like it sort of undermines the autonomy of the schools, and that was also a view that was shared by the homeschooling fraternity. So what we did, we sought for a presentation from the department as a Democratic Alliance. We asked that the department comes and presents the bill to us. Up to so far, the bill hasn't been introduced to Parliament and neither to the portfolio committee. But what we've seen is that there was some kind of discussion that we had with the department just to know what were the issues with the bill, and we also identified basically the intention to basically undermine the rights of schools. Although there were some parts of the legislation that we thought were actually good that we can adopt, but there were those that we sort of felt like the bill, as I said, seeks to undermine the autonomy of the schools. So for now, what has happened is that the Pestalozzi Trust, together with other home education groups, have fortunately had the privilege to engage with the minister, and the discussions over this bill are still ongoing. And we haven't, up to so far, seen the bill yet. It hasn't been introduced, and also, the fact that now we are having this crisis of COVID-19, we sort of like in limbo in terms of the legislation that needs to be introduced, despite the fact that now that the Parliament is starting to operate and to function in whatever capacity that it can. So we are basically trying to find ways of having the Parliament, to work to its full capacity, but using virtual online, which is quite a challenge. And I think, many countries are finding themselves in this situation. Going back to, basically to COVID-19, as you know, it has dramatically impacted the education sector in South Africa. Schools closed on the 18th of March, and the country entered into a national lockdown. The virus impacted the school in different ways, but what we have seen is that those schools that have resources have been able to have virtual learning within the school itself and have managed to continue with the education. But then this is not something that has been done with other schools, because other schools are, the public school, the majority of, what we call the quintile 1 to 3. They are really schools that are non-paying schools, which are poorly resourced, and they face enormous challenges. And the school closure has seriously impacted learning within the schools. And also, the fact that we have this coronavirus, it has meant that 9 million learners that normally would receive nutrition at school are not receiving that nutrition. And it's become now a crisis that we believe that now, if learners, they're not getting the nutrition that they should be getting, are really not receiving that. So that has brought a lot of concerns within the education sector. And what we have basically opted for now is that the ministry has decided that there has to be some kind of a phased-in approach. From the 1st of June, we are going to be seeing the grade 12s, which is the final year, and also of the final year of the high school, and also the grade 7s, which is the final year of primary school. You're going back to school, and but ensuring that all the requirements are in place in terms of regulations, of ensuring that there is safety, that there is protective clothing, that not only protective clothing, like you have masks, face masks, we have sanitization that is going to be happening in schools, and having the infrastructure, or even the infrastructure that will allow social distancing, which will obviously be a challenge. And so now, because of that, many parents now are looking into homeschooling as an alternative, because they believe that as long as we haven't reached our peak, which has been predicted by the our health department and also scientists to say that our health peak, our virus, the peak of the virus will be in September. So many parents they believe that after September that will be the right time for their children to go to school. So they are looking for temporary ways of being able to provide education to their children until September. And homeschooling has been the number one a choice or an option that they would like to look into. I've also received calls of people who are saying, how do you go about to start providing homeschooling for their families. So it has been something that we really hoping that it can actually come to play, because what has happened is that the president when he gave his speech on Sunday, the past Sunday, he said parents who feel they don't want their children to go back to school, they have a right to do so. They have a right to do so as long as they are provided with some kind of education. So then, that has basically been emphasized the importance of this. And going forward, I think it's something that we really have to, make it more accessible for parents and be able to have the support that they need. Should that be an option? It shouldn't be something that has to come when we're having a crisis. It has to be fully acknowledged and also, to be supported. The parents need to get as much support from the Department of Basic Education in terms of ensuring that, it does become an option. And also, just to add to that, and to have the type of infrastructure that will allow that we have online learning that goes together with that, with homeschooling and also, with our public sector. Thank you so much, and it's been such a privilege to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me all right, Trudy?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, it's showing my picture, not my video stream though, which is strange. Why is that?
I can see you as well.
You can, okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you got to see my desktop. It's a little crazy here. At any rate, thank you so much, Nomsa, for your comments. And I have one question I want to ask for Dr. Murphy. Give him a little warning there, Dr. Murphy. We have one question. We've lost our national elected policymakers. It's hard to get them to stay for very, very long. We very, very privileged to have such distinguished guests from South Africa, Russia, and the United States. Dr. Murphy, one question for you we have is, what do you think the public education system is going to do to transform its current educational offering in light of this pandemic? We see how they're going to respond to the pandemic in terms of the social distancing and masks at schools and disinfecting and half-day schedules. But do you have, in a brief moment, do you have any sense of where this is going to go? Can you put on your future glasses and maybe give us a sense? What do you think?
My sense is it's going to open the whole system up. So there will remain public schooling. Parents will be able to keep their children at home. They can go to private school. It's just like any other market that we've seen change over time. The market will grow and develop, and people will be able to make their own choices and decisions.
So you see education privatizing even more. This was one of your theories in your book.
Yeah.
About the privatization that's happening, not just in education, but in the entire society. So you see that happening.
Respond to the market. And if they don't respond to what parents want, their product will not sell.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your participation. We'll be continuing on with our panel now. Our next speaker is Minister of Education, Kelvin Goertzen. He is a Minister of Education in Manitoba. Canada. He is the Government House Leader, a graduate of the University of Manitoba. He has degrees in economics, commerce, and law. And Minister Goertzen, if you want to go ahead and come on, the floor is yours. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Michael, and good morning. Well, it's good morning in Manitoba. I'm not sure where the time will be in all the various places that participants are in around the world, but it is a pleasure to join you. I'm in Steinbach, Manitoba. That is the center of Canada, if you can picture Canada in your mind. I would be about 2 hours from Grand Forks, North Dakota, which we visit often on the weekend with my family. And of course, we can't visit it now because the international borders are closed. But in terms of proximity, that's where we are located. So as Minister of Education in Manitoba, I was previously the Minister of Health, and so I have something of a unique perspective on the pandemic, both from the education side and from the health side. Canada, in dealing with COVID-19, the coronavirus, is not entirely equal, and just as it is in other areas, there are some provinces that are hit more specifically and have more impact because of the coronavirus, which of course has impacted their schools as well. But every school across Canada did close down early in March, and all of those schools and students were of course then displaced. Now, some of the schools are opening up at this point. In British Columbia, they're back on a limited basis with in-class learning. In some parts of rural Quebec, that is happening. In some parts of the Maritimes, the teachers are back within the schools. And starting on Monday of next week in Manitoba, in the area that I live in, we are going to have limited in-class activities. So teachers will be going back, having one-on-one assessments with students and some small groups as well. And so we are far from normal, but we are moving back a little bit towards what normality may look like, particularly in the fall. So as the Minister of Education, I hear a lot from parents. I get lots of questions, concerns, letters, different sorts of interaction in terms of how this homeschooling, crisis schooling experience has gone for them. And I hear many, many different things. And of course, I'm a parent myself. I'm a parent of an 8-year-old. So I'm experiencing that not just from a government perspective, but also from a parental perspective as well. So some parents have indicated to me that having their kids at home and doing their best that they can in terms of providing instruction and coordination with teachers who are working remotely and sending stuff home to students has gone well. I've heard stories that there are many students who are more focused than they have been when they're traditionally in the classroom, whose grades are improving, whose overall mental health is improving, and who are really connecting in a different way with their family. That is on the most positive side of the spectrum, and I'm happy to say that my family would probably fit into that more positive side of the spectrum. Of course, I hear a lot of other things as well, that it has not gone well, that some parents are struggling tremendously, that some students are struggling as well. And I try to remind those who are involved on both sides that this was not planned. This isn't homeschooling in the traditional way, where you prepare for the year coming up, where you prepare yourself as a parent or a guardian, and you prepare your kids for that year. This is something that wasn't expected and that nobody had really planned for. And so to try to separate out some of that, to remember that all of those good social aspects that are happening in terms of reconnecting with your kids, maybe in a way that you hadn't before, those are all positives that do exist within the homeschooling traditional environment, and that should be remembered. The challenges that you might be experiencing when it comes to helping your student with the education curriculum itself isn't really a normal homeschooling experience now, because you didn't have time to prepare. And so to try to hold some of this experience loosely and to then consider how it could impact your decisions in the future, whether that is looking at homeschooling or just simply doing schooling in a different way, and maybe just being more engaged in the lives of your students, which would be a good thing, because certainly I have seen, both as a parent and as Minister of Education, that there has been a movement within, certainly within Canada, and I'm sure it's true in many places in the world, to simply give over that education to the state, to government. And that, of course, is part of choice. And I'm a big believer in choice when it comes to education. But regardless if students are homeschooling or in the public school system, that parental engagement is very, very important. And even if it doesn't change numbers in terms of homeschooling, and I know a lot of your presenters said that it certainly would, it hopefully will change that parental engagement and that recognition that education isn't simply a state activity. Maybe should even be primarily a state activity. I mean, much of that education, maybe most of that education for a lot of things should be considered in the home as well. So parental engagement, I think, is something that's going to be very important coming out of this when we're on the other side of this pandemic. Research in Manitoba shows that homeschooling is successful, where you have, of course, a willing student, a willing child, and an engaged parent. It's also more successful when you have other homeschoolers around you. So when there's a community of homeschoolers who can interact together. That success grows when there is some support from government. So whether that's allowing homeschooling families to access the gyms within the public school system or the libraries, to give them that support and that resource that they might not otherwise be able to access. So in agreeing with the professor who spoke well on this issue a few minutes ago in his presentation, I think this will change the dynamic for homeschooling, both from a perception perspective, because there's going to be a lot of parents who may have a different sort of understanding of what it's like to have your child at home more often, and hopefully a positive experience, particularly on the social side. But there'll be a need, I think, to grow more resources for those who are homeschooling, or for those who simply want to be more engaged with their students at home, even if they are in the public school system. And I do think that we're going to see more activity on resources online, the ability to have more curriculum online, and ultimately have more students engaged in that way online. And that's a good thing, because that offers more and more choice to students and to parents. I would conclude my time by saying something I said on a previous presentation. Homeschooling and homeschoolers often talk a lot about rights, and that's important. Our government in Manitoba has been very clear in saying that we support the right of parents to have choice within education, whether that's independent schools or whether that's homeschooling, or of course the public school system. That choice, those rights, need to be exercised and need to be protected. But ministers of education don't spend a lot of time talking about rights. We don't, as we get together as ministers across Canada, like we do frequently, either online in this version or personally when we can do that, we don't talk a lot about rights in education. We talk about results. Ministers of education, our language is about results. We get queried by the media based on the results of students. How are your students doing in international or local tests? What are the results? And I would say to homeschoolers and homeschooling families, you have a great story to tell. There are lots of really good results, and we've heard about some of those from Senator Cruz and others on this webinar, that the results are there. And don't just talk about rights, because rights often follow results in a lot of different things. And if we can prove the results of homeschooling and independent schooling and other schooling, it'll continue, I think, to show that we need to have more of those options, more of those rights. And rather than results following rights, I think that results can lead rights in a lot of different places. So thank you for all the different panelists who've been involved here this morning. I've appreciated hearing from you. I learn from you. I learn every time Mike sets one of these up, and I'm grateful for that opportunity to learn from those around the world. Bless each of you as you're going through your issue with coronavirus and COVID-19, and I hope that you and your families remain safe and that your countries do well in this time.
Thank you, Minister Goertzen. Great remarks and very much appreciated from you. I would like to turn our next speaker, Angela Vidal Gandra da Silva Martins. who is the National Secretary for the Family, serving in the Brazilian Ministry of Women, Children, Family, and Human Rights. She is a graduate of the Faculty of Law of the University of Sao Paulo and holds a PhD in Philosophy of Law from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, has been a researcher and professor of anthropological fundamentals of law at Harvard Law School. Welcome, Secretary Gandra. We are so glad to have you. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with friends as Michael, Professor Young, and also Senator Ted Cruz, who I supported when I lived in the United States. It's a pleasure to see him too, right? Thank you, Michael, for this invitation to this so important webinar to deepen in the force of education. In fact, every human being to be good or to grow, learn, and stick to the good needs help to develop his or her talents. And the first and main role is this in this task belongs to the family, which is also constituted to guarantee education. Although the Declaration of Human Rights and our Constitution guarantee this fundamental human right to the family, we are not allowed to homeschool yet in our country. The child was sort of taken from the family and given to the state for lots of years of leftist governments. And besides a lot of harm related, unfortunately, to manipulation and ideology of gender, some of the results are either the omission of parents in education, delegating children to the school and not caring, or the difficult, in many cases, an obsession to understand the benefits of homeschooling. Since the very beginning, our Ministry of Women, Family, and Human Rights took this challenge as one of our first goals. Defend homeschooling, fight for homeschooling, the human right of parents to choose what they see as better for their children and give them platform to do so. The Supreme Court has already recognized this constitutional right. Now we, administration, are supporting a project of law, we call here, at the Parliament to approve, hopefully this year, with real freedom, the right to homeschool. I say real freedom because it seems that sometimes we want to give the right, but we want to control it. And we want only a reasonable control that we understand from the state, but not to suffocate parents with so many rules to homeschool. And it's unfortunately with the crisis, the Corona crisis, that is so sad. We have this positive thing that parents are being awakened for education. They are seeing, they are realizing how important it is to accompany their children, to learn with their children, to teach their children, and the benefits of a possible homeschooling. We are very glad to be able to reflect and learn from you in this seminar. And we truly hope to have you as partners who support us to achieve this goal this year and keep around as veterans in our next steps to improve our system in homeschooling. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Angela. What a privilege to have you on our webinar today. And I just have to say that I have been to Brazil a number of times. Eu amo brasileiros.
Yeah.
What a
Muito
wonderful country you
obrigada.
have.
Muito obrigada.
Obrigado, obrigado. What a wonderful country you have. And I thank you so much for being here. We have 3 Brazilian speakers here from your government, and it is so encouraging to see the momentum for homeschooling in Brazil, and it needs to move, and I hope that it will. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Sergio Henrique Cabral Santana is a special advisor to the Minister of Education in Brazil, who drafted milestone homeschooling legislation in Brazil, which is hopefully will become actually the law in Brazil. We will see. He is the founder of one of the most recognized firms in the field of educational law in Brazil, and is a professor of educational law. Special advisor, the floor is yours.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see everybody. It's an honor to be here on this Global Policymakers Forum of Home Education. And I think to start, we need to at first address a little explanation about the Brazilian constitution and legal system. Differently from the United States, where the constitution delegates large part of the legislative power to the states, in Brazil, the National Congress is responsible for the regulation power over the majority of the matters. In the case of basic education, the Lei de Diretrizes e Bases da Educação Nacional, which is the general Brazilian educational law, states that the responsibility for education is divided by the federal, states, and city systems, with the federal government creating general regulations and financing programs, and the states and cities being directly responsible for the regulation and supervising of schools. So these obligations is split by the federal government, states government, and city government, which create a very complex scenario to introduce homeschooling in Brazil. Homeschooling in Brazil, I will explain this later. In a practical analysis, is not legal, as has been decided by the Supremo Tribunal Federal, which is the Brazilian Supreme Court. The current scenario here is very uncomfortable because thousands of families have been already practicing homeschooling, but in a complete absence of legal certainty. For more than 15 years, Brazilian families have been fighting to have home education regulated by the government, by the Congress. However, even though there have been some legal projects addressing the topic in Congress and some controversy around the question, Brazilian families believe that homeschooling is perfectly compatible with the constitutional law and test of the law. But in September 2018, the Supreme Court completely changed the legal situation, as it declared that even though some home education did not represent a disrespect to the Constitution, it required regulation in order to be considered legal. So in one act, every single family in the country that have been teaching their children at home was put in a legal jeopardy. So the situation in Brazil is that we are kind of in a gray area, because at the same time that the Supreme Court says it is compatible with the Constitution, it says that homeschooling needs regulation to become a reality in the country. In my opinion, it's the same thing as that I say is not legal. That's the truth, because family can't do homeschooling like they should be able to do. In Brazil, most resistance to approving homeschooling law comes from the left-wing parties and the educational system bureaucrats' common interests. The left-wing campaigners don't want families to be free from educational system indoctrination, which is historically very solid in the country. On the other hand, educational system bureaucrats always fight to avoid any measure that is likely to decrease taxpayers' money that goes to them. Naturally, this is one of the first impacts of homeschooling, one of the first that will arise in that case. Jair Bolsonaro administration recently sent medida provisória, which is a bill that works as the same way, works similar to executive order in the United States. But after previous discussions with Congress leaders, it has been decided that the text would be sent to the Congress in a form of a regular bill. We strongly believe that this recent text is likely easier to be approved than the previous ones existent, because it doesn't center all the obligations in the federal government and regulate that the children should be enrolled in already existing schools that are supervised by the local governments and will be responsible for receiving and registering educational activity reports that will be prepared by the fathers, the parents, and applying annual tests to the children. This aspect makes unnecessary that the federal government creates a whole new national structure on the Ministry of Education to regulate and supervise homeschooling, simplifying law enforcement and providing a scenario where enrollments could be immediately carried out. We hope this way that soon homeschooler families in Brazil have the rights to educate their children at home guaranteed by a federal law with the appropriate legal certainty, ending this long time of political battle and suffering for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Special Advisor Santana. What a privilege to have you among our panelists here. And I do have a question from someone here, and I'll just go ahead and ask it since we have you here, and maybe we'll lose you. You probably have many meetings. You're a very busy man, I'm sure. A question from one of our Brazilian attendees, and asks, what is the plan for the government, or is there any plan after things start to open up in Brazil to officially treat or recognize families as who are homeschooling because of the pandemic? Or are you just going to continue, or will things just continue kind of as they have been?
By the Brazilian laws, we need regulation. So we need the Congress to approve a law official creating homeschooling. Right now, what we have is distance learning, but inside the legislation of regular education. So we really need a new law to create this reality where homeschool is completely free and approved by the law.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say something to Michael.
Please.
From our ministry, as we have the articulation, we are trying also to give information to parents and families, because they really don't know, as it seems so prohibited. It's hard for people to understand that this is a normal way of educating besides schools. And we are trying to give information. There are lots of, institutions that are fighting for this now, to give information, to explain, because sometimes it seems like some religious stuff, or something that is like against some ideological points of view. And it's not, it's all about wanting the best for your children. And sometimes because it's more economic, and it's, and even for the parents, they have more time to spend with children and have culture and sports and everything. So we have some, we don't have enough information on this, on this homeschooling, on home education. So we're spreading this all over the country, and also trying to explain that we can have homeschooling and have social life. Because one of the main things that they fight against homeschooling is that you won't have like social life. It's just like excluding your children from social life. And we are also trying to show that it's all the way around. And people from home are prepared to have a better even social life. But we're not defending, our ministry, for example, we're not defending homeschooling as the only way of teaching children, but both. But also we are calling families with a program that is called Family at School, to bring them to school to accompany the children, because we think that parents have a main and fundamental role in education. That's it. Sorry.
No, thank you so much. A very important clarification. And I would just also say we have a very diverse group of nationalities, ethnicities, and different views, political opinions, views across the spectrum here. And homeschooling is a very diverse community. Obviously, the views represented here are a set of views that are very important and represent policymakers mostly, and are designed to give policymakers some tools and some perspectives. So those are very important comments, Angela, and I thank you for them. Let me go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Anthony Tanis-Wright is the Chief of Staff of the Department of Literacy in the Ministry of Education in Brazil, and it is really exciting to see that two ministries are working together, hopefully working together, to advance this common goal of moving homeschooling forward in the National Congress in Brazil. Anthony Tanis-Wright is the Chief of Staff for the Department of Literacy in the Ministry of Education. He's a graduate of Thomas More College, has 2 master's degrees from the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná, and is a PhD candidate at the Leiden Law School. Chief of Staff Wright, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Michael. I'd also like to thank Trudy for all the emails she sent us organizing the forum. Well, first of all, I'm going to give in my speech a more cultural approach to the issue, and Sergio did a bit of a legal approach, and Angela Gandra did what would say a human rights look into the issue. And so I'll do a cultural one and then be open to questions also if there are any. First of all, if I'd give a title for the speech, although it's not properly a lecture, it would be a home education, a policy towards freedom and democracy, right? I think home education is truly a free education in all its sense. And also I think it's very pro-democratic, understanding democracy in its correct terminology. Now, in this brief explanation, I would like to address 3 things. First of all, present how the anti-homeschooling arguments in Brazil are drawn, how do they work, and then give a very brief refutation and rebut them. Then show how behind all those arguments is truly a totalitarian mindset. Behind anti-homeschooling principles, there is, in our day and age, very strong principles towards states controlling our lives, and I think that's surely very dangerous. And then lastly, I would like to explain a bit how the strategy in Brazil of anti-homeschoolers is the use of ambiguous and debatable terms, which in public debate, before you even start creating policy, they try to convince Congress of why homeschooling is wrong and how we cannot start debating them in their own terminology. So the first 3 types of arguments you see, and is being mentioned before in this panel, is regarding socialization. That's the first thing many of them say, that kids are going to be at home full time. They're not going to be, they're not going to grow well, or they're going to have some problems, or they're not going to, meet people and so forth. The second, and they're not going to encounter diversity, which is always one thing they all are always so worried about. The second argument, in Brazil at least, is that they say parents will not be able to teach their kids, and they accuse them of poor academic achievement. And that's funny because we can't even say that because we don't even have data in Brazil for now. But that's what they already start their arguments. And thirdly, what they try to do is bring together families against schools and schools against families. The anti-homeschooling people say that as soon as you have homeschooling, teachers will be undervalued, and they try to bring the whole approach of a war between families and teachers. So the first counter argument about socialization is pretty obvious and has been said before. Kids don't start socializing with friends, they start socializing with their parents. I think if you have a kid, you're going to see that the baby starts, enjoying time with their mother, and then with his dad, and then with siblings, and then obviously with cousins and uncles and so forth. And obviously, parents have friends. So friends will will have children, and they're going to meet each other, and there'll be no surprise that children will meet children. Another factor of socialization is that they want the kids to encounter diversity. And that's an interesting topic here, because diversity, for those that are anti-homeschooling, means, it's sort of a realm of meeting everything that's different and pluralism, and then not necessarily it's good in itself. For them, it's good. For them, diversity is all something good and new, and you have to meet people that are different than you. But really, the word diversity underlines sort of a dangerous agenda, I would say, which tries to introduce, like is being said before here by someone, of gender ideology and a wrong idea of family, and also moral principles, which can be quite questionable. The second point of the poor academic achievement is a twofold answer here. First of all, we know that public school system in Brazil, sadly but truly, is not very good, and you can know that by simply checking international and national exams statistics. So homeschooling has a great chance of succeeding in Brazil, because parents will have more time to spend with their kids and properly educate them. But however, we can't even prove how homeschooling will be successful in Brazil. As Sergio had mentioned, we don't really have it a homeschooling allowed yet. So it's hard for us to measure how homeschoolers are doing in public and national exams, because it's not something we can measure. The third point of undervalued teachers, they try to say that as soon as you allow homeschooling, parents are going to start fighting with the professors and teachers, and you're going to create sort of a dichotomy between homeschooling and household and so forth. And that's really not the case. I think it's rather the contrary. I do believe that homeschooling will work together with teachers, will work together with schools, just like Angela mentioned right now. I think they both will work hands on hands. And I do think that parents might want to homeschool for early education, and then maybe put their kids in school afterwards for secondary education, how I've seen in the US before. So I don't think there's a war between homeschooling and schooling. I think it's something that both are going to help each other. And lastly, what I'd like to say is regarding the ambiguous terminology, in Brazil, it's very common to hear people discuss homeschooling, and especially the anti-homeschooling crowd. They say that, parents that want to homeschool, they teach their kids only what they want to teach, and they are sort of using their kids as property of the family, which is absurd, but that's been said before. Also, they say homeschooling disrespects the children's right of education, and also is some sort of imprisonment of the children and a control over them. All this terminology and sort of sentences, which are seen constantly in newspapers or in some congressman mouths and so forth, and speeches, is absurd. I think sadly, people forget what natural rights are and natural law. And I think families obviously comes before the state. And sometimes people put the state before the families. And I think that's where totalitarianism is very strong. Another factor is also what they call diversity and acceptance, is exactly what they don't do. They don't accept homeschoolers. They don't accept the diversity of having different type of education. And they wrongly put freedom in their mouths as well. When they say they want freedom, they don't allow other people to have freedom of choosing at least the minimum, which is how to educate their kids. That's pretty much it. As a solution to Brazil's cultural thing, what we're trying to do, as Sergio said, is to try to pass a law which will help families simply do what they can, which is the right to educate their children.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I really appreciate that. I think your point about diversity and pluralism is very important. If we want to truly be diverse and pluralistic in our societies, we need to have different modes of education. So thank you, Angela and Sergio and Anthony, for the work you're doing, and your ministers as well. I'd like to introduce a very good friend of mine, and then we'll have a moment, if we have some time, which I think we may, to have a brief discussion. There's a few questions here. I'd like to introduce a friend of mine who is also a state senator in the state of West Virginia. Patricia Rucker was born in Caracas, Venezuela. She's a naturalized United States citizen and is an amazing story, and has risen to become a state senator in the state of West Virginia and is the chair of the Senate Education Committee. She is a homeschooling parent of 5 and a graduate of Trinity College, and I'm so pleased to call her a friend. And Senator Rucker, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone. I'm just honored to be part of this incredible discussion. Have gained so much from listening to others, and I am grateful to give my opinion or my viewpoints. I'll just start off by saying that I, as a homeschooling mom myself who chose that option, now being the chair of education in the state of West Virginia, I am able to bring a lot of education to my fellow legislators and to the state as to what education is. And many of you have brought up the difficulty that you are having in your country in terms of how to discuss education, regulate education. In some of your countries, just have it be acknowledged as an option. I can tell you we've been through that. And I'm grateful that Homeschool Legal Defense Association and other local homeschooling groups have been partners in this United States and in West Virginia to be able to help us to gain more options and more control. And that's kind of my role now, is as a policymaker trying to find ways to encourage the option, help make it more flexible, have proper oversight, but more than anything else, clarify and simplify the way that students who have been educated at home can then enter the workforce, go into college and all those things. So that's just a brief overview. In the United States, education is theoretically controlled at the state level. So every single state can have different rules and different ways that they regulate it. But we do try to have some conformity. And when a state has passed a good legislation, something that really makes sense, I can tell you that I will look at that and try to see if I could bring it to West Virginia. I'm an advocate for school choice of all kinds. I must say that, public education is an option for some and it's successful for some, but private education in the United States, we have things called charter schools, allowing transferring of students from one to another, creating alternative schools that are geared for specific subjects. All of those things are an option for parents to help, serve what their kids need. And some other presenters have mentioned this, how the number one primary educators of their children are the parents. And they know their kids the best, and they understand what their children's needs are. That is what led me to homeschooling in the first place. I had 2 children who had special needs, and the public education system just could not handle the needs that they wanted. So, I had to find another way, and homeschooling has turned out to be a great option for our family. In terms of education regulation, I want to just bring up, if you start the conversation with the idea that most parents want what's best for their children, the regulation of homeschooling that many have talked about needing to do in their particular states, it's easy. What regulation means is making certain that there is going to be accountability, and I think that's important no matter what education option there is, but giving a way for parents to easily be able to let the states know that they are succeeding, that they're doing well. If they need help, having options for getting that help. Having the flexibility here in West Virginia, a parent can choose to take 1 or 2 and up to 4 classes at the public school if it's something that they can't teach at home. And also our community colleges and our four-year colleges offer dual enrollment classes, so that let's say you want your child, you're home educating your child, but you can't really do a lab biology, you can actually sign them up and they can take a lab biology class in college with college students. And that has been very, very successful and has grown by leaps and bounds. And a lot of homeschooling parents are taking advantage of that. And it's a great way of partnering and making certain those kids are getting the education they need, but still allowing the majority of the education to be done at home. Because we know that, again, it's working really, really well. The educating at home, and especially with this COVID-19 crisis, now everyone is forced to be doing it. We now know with the use of technology and internet, with the ability to be able to access resources from all over the world, there are websites and companies that offer many curriculum choices. It really, truly is the greatest time ever to be able to access this great right to educate your children at home. It is amazing to me the amount of things that I can now access for my children if they have a particular interest and they want to study something in depth. That's now possible. So the challenges that we have in West Virginia, and I think in the entire United States and possibly in your countries, is the internet is something that we don't have accessible to everyone. There are areas of the United States, and definitely in West Virginia, I can tell you, where you don't have good access. So that does limit them. And I'm going to be pushing to try to expand more access and have more options in terms of internet connectivity. And one of the things I would like to see is clear pathways for homeschoolers, those who have been educated at home, to be recognized for that. So we have colleges and universities who are now accepting homeschoolers and actually are gratified to have homeschoolers. I have asked our West Virginia higher education institutions to submit to me a report on how homeschoolers are doing when they get to the college campus. And overwhelmingly, they say homeschoolers are doing fantastic in higher education. But some of the other areas that some of these students might want to go to, it's a little more difficult. So career apprenticeships, sometimes, they're uncomfortable with the idea that the child was educated at home, doesn't have a, diploma from a public education institution. So I really want to try to take away those hurdles so that it is recognized no matter where that homeschool student goes. I want to say, this COVID-19 has been a trial and a challenge, but I think this is a perfect time to have this discussion, to talk about the different options and to work on increasing these policies to help homeschoolers and homeschooling grow. I think it is something that in my family, I'm so grateful I had the opportunity, and I certainly want to help other families also have that same success.
Thank you so much, Senator Rucker. One quick question for you, and I would note that together, you and I worked on a bill, one of your first ones, I think, when you took office, to recognize that homeschool diplomas and homeschool credentials are equivalent, essentially equivalent, and cannot be treated any differently. And so in West Virginia, and there are a number of states in the United States that have laws that prohibit discrimination against students just because they graduate from a homeschool program. So, that is something that policymakers should consider as they look at their laws and policies. There are sometimes things that get in the way based on a person's secondary education. We see that in the United States from time to time, background check companies trying to verify the homeschool or a high school diploma. And when they encounter a homeschool diploma, they don't quite know what to do with it. And so that's why laws like the one that you passed or helped pass in the West Virginia legislature are so important. So thank you for that. So grateful to have this distinguished panel. We're doing well on time, and we did schedule this for 2 hours, so I'm going to continue moving here. we're turning our attention now to civil society. And I would like to introduce by a video message Professor Dr. Jan de Groef, who serves as the Government Commissioner for Universities and is a professor at the College of Europe in Belgium. He's one of the most renowned scholars on education rights and law, a founder of the European Law Association. He's authored almost 100 books and 212 chapters in books and periodicals, a prolific author. He was the UNESCO Charge de Mission on the Right to Education from 2007 to 2010, and he consults regularly with national parliaments, governments, and stakeholders. He has numerous earned degrees and honorary degrees, and it's a privilege for me to call him a friend. He was planning to join us here, and at the very last minute, something came up that prevented him from being here live, but he was able to pull together a video. So hopefully now that I'm a little bit more practiced at sharing videos, this will work a little bit better. So give me a moment here as I bring on Dr. Jan de Groef.
Good day. It's rather frustrating not to join the conference in real time due to Zoom bombing of the campuses of this university. Anyway, let me limit myself to 5 thoughts due to limited time. What are challenging experiences from this COVID-19 crisis? And what to keep in mind for the post-pandemic era, especially dealing with homeschool education. First, trust parents. This very special time reminded the whole society that parents and families have the prior responsibility for the education of their children. And this conclusion goes to the core of education rights and freedom of education, especially when schools had to be closed. Schools have to rely on parents for months. They proved, not without difficulties, their capacity as caretakers of the teaching of their kids. Why should we mistrust parents who are organizing the learning process at home? Second thought, did schools fail? Schools were not always providing the best activity and quality, organizing online education programs. We cannot blame them for that. And they proved their commitments and flexibility, but the formal, regular system has to learn to appreciate alternative learning routes. 3. The future concept of schools will be hybrid. Universities and colleges have dramatically restructured themselves into long-distance learning environment. They will keep the modalities of this concept for a long period of time, partly as a definite pattern. Investment in education, innovation and technology will remain
Okay, apparently I did it again. Sorry, folks. I'm still learning the Zoom thing here. Give me a moment. Oh, dear, dear. One moment.
prominent on the agenda. And this applies definitely also to schools. The idea of the monopoly of the school seems totally outdated. The educational systems will structurally adopt the hybrid concept: home, school, open, regular. And public authorities have to recognize positively valid alternatives as homeschooling for those parents who opt for that right. 4. What is the risk of so-called parallel societies? I have already made a critical analysis of the European and national case law in a number of my academic writings, referring to the so-called parallel society argument in the case of homeschooling. The COVID-19 crisis proved the multiple experiences stimulating interpersonal contacts and fostering social behavior. Schools, of course, offer a social environment, but other occasions cannot be neglected. And 5, I would love to focus on foresight and future strategies dealing with education. Namely, more room for a diversity in the education system. That is unavoidable. It has to be fully recognized as in the best interest of the child. Choices for innovative, personalized learning processes have to be accepted and recognized as the key for the future, because the whole life of a child is contained in his or her upbringing.
Well, thank you, Dr. de Groef. We only missed about 4 seconds. He was just finishing up and he said, please have a good day. Thank you so much. It's very much appreciated to have you, even if only for a few minutes by video. Trusting parents, personalized education process for children are the key points that homeschooling delivers and that Professor de Groef has really honed in on. Our next speaker is the Executive Director of OIDEL. Ignacy Grau-Calizo is the General Director of OIDEL, an international organization in Switzerland. He holds a bachelor's in law and business administration, a master's degree in political science, has been in charge of the Freedom of Education Index published by OIDEL, and is the coordinator of the NGO platform on the right to education at the United Nations. Ignacy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a really an honor to be today with you on this Policymakers Forum, and a pleasure also to learn from all of you. Well, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to make some reflections on the evolution of the acknowledgement of parents in the political sphere and how the coronavirus has affected that. In 1963, I think Clark Kerr, who was at the time the Berkeley University president, said in a conference that what the rail did in the second half of the last century and the automobile did during the first half of the this century could be done in the second half of the century by the knowledge industry, that is education. Yes, the 70s were a transforming period for the US educational system on a quantitative way, and the US and the United States government doubled the educational budget. The number of teachers passed from 1 million to 2-3 million. And in addition, the number of people going into higher education was higher than ever before. And even President Johnson at the time said the answer of all national problems come to one single word: education. This revolution later took place in Europe, and we can talk about mainly a quantitative revolution because we are talking about increasing numbers of people acceding to education. And this at the end took form in strengthening a new middle class, enabling an empowerment for many citizens around the Western world. Nevertheless, not everything was great for this revolution. The school's performance declined during that time, and education did not bring the expected social stability. Now again, in the 21st century, we are hearing these new revolutions in education. We are hearing about new technologies. We are hearing about the multiple intelligence paradigm of Garner, the new neuroscientific discoveries such as the factor. And we are informed on this time on a new revolution, a qualitative educational revolution with the same expectations as the 70s, 60s revolutions. Why am I talking so much about revolutions? Well, the changes offered by these two revolutions are good and offer the possibility for a better realization of the right to education. Nevertheless, the idea of revolution always entails a danger, which risk might present this kind of revolutions. Revolutions have the tendency of conceiving the new disruptive elements as a magic wand that will change education for good. And therefore, the promoters of this revolution have the tendency to banish or underrate all the previous structures. And this is the institution that has been more vilified during this process usually have been parents and families. This does not mean that these education innovations or these policies are good, are not good, or are in contraposition with families. It just means that families, little by little, especially in the international sphere, have been less recognized. In my field, for instance, in the United Nations, we have not seen any reference to family in any of the last 5 years resolutions on the right to education. And furthermore, very little substance concerning families is to be found in UNESCO documents on the last years. But in this context, coronavirus perhaps, and I think something is changing. Coronavirus has supposed a major breakdown of the educational systems around the world. This crisis has revealed the strengths and flaws of the systems. Just as an example, we are going to observe for real the possibilities of distance learning or the potential of technologies in education, I think, with this crisis. But a few days back, Andreas Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OCDE, pointed that this is not the moment to push for new ideas, but identify what is working to expand its implementation. And what is it working in this context? In this context where, according to UNESCO, more than 90% of children have been out of a school, parents have emerged as the main support for the learning of children. I think no one can deny that, and we are seeing parents emerging from this crisis. We can observe parents that are in the center of the educational chessboard after many years. And in this regard, many strategies and government assistance package to overcome this crisis are targeting parents, even governments who haven't been comfortable and recognizing the role of parents. Also at the international level, I can say I'm quite surprised that we have observed that the reference of parents in educational international documents has been multiplied in the last 2 months. So from an international perspective, I think there are 2 points that might be critical for the development of parental rights in the right to education in the following years. One is the place that parents will have in the future of educational discussions. And second is the importance of adopting a common good perspective. I'm going to develop really briefly these 2 axes. First, coronavirus, as I say, has shown that parents are crucial actors for the realization of the right to education. And now we have that in other documents other than the Declaration and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which is already something really important. But once again, they have proven their importance, and it seems that the international community have understand that for good. And I think it's time to address educational debates taking into consideration parents and their educational choices. And we, as OIDEA, we are really looking forward for the next council to include the parents and the parents' recognitions in the next resolution on the right to education. Also, the second thing is to adopt a common good perspective. I think, and I'm really looking forward that with this crisis, we have to overcome we will overcome the vertical approach children state in the educational debates, but also I think we have to overcome the individualistic approach. We should refocus on education as a common good. And what does it mean at international spheres? It means that actors keep repeating that we have to emerge from this crisis together. This does not have to mean that we have to overcome this crisis under the same bureaucratic control, but through the collaboration of all the actors. And here I encourage the homeschooling community to show to the different stakeholders, we are not part of the problem, we are part of the solution. We have developed methodologies and materials that now can be useful for the rest of the educational community, and also showing that trusting parents in the field of education eventually should benefit the whole educational community. And this is a great opportunity to show that. This crisis has helped us to realize what is important in the realization of the right to education. It is a time for optimism for a future of the right to education in which all actors should be taken into consideration, an area in which parents should become once again main figures. We have reasons to be optimistic, I think, but we have to earn this optimism. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ignacy. Wonderful. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing there in Geneva to advance these important rights in education. Thank you so much. Robert Enlow is the president and CEO of EdChoice, one of the nation's most respected and successful advocates for educational choice. He has authored numerous articles, book chapters, and op-eds that appear in journals and books and papers all over the United States. He has a postgraduate education from Oxford University and a bachelor's from the Seattle Pacific University. He's active on numerous boards and works tirelessly to improve educational opportunities for all children in America as a champion for school choice. Robert, the floor is yours.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. And I have to say, it's been an honor to hear all of the incredible participants today and learn so much about what's going on around the world. I'm going to comment and talk about American education and the response to the COVID crisis among parents, teachers, and states, and then talk about the landscape, the opportunities, and the threats that we are facing. Briefly, when you ask about the landscape, when you look at this crisis that's been going on in schooling in America, what are parents concerned about? Obviously, they're concerned about their children getting exposed to the virus at school. Clearly, 2/3 of them in a poll that we did recently said that's their biggest concern. Well, that'll bear out when we talk about reopening of schools. What will be a parent's willingness to go back to schools? Really, what's interesting when we surveyed parents as well was the things that they were concerned about versus the things they weren't concerned about. So fully 7 out of 10 of them were concerned about their child missing instruction time, but barely half of them were worried about the meals, right? So it's interesting, the things that the teachers are worried about and the school systems are worried about are the provision of social services, the provision of meals, rightfully so. The things the parents are worried about are getting their kids educated, which we thought was very interesting. They're very concerned about their child missing that instruction time, but not worried if they're missing work time. Only 54% of the parents said we're concerned if we miss work because school is closed. They really have a sense of their children needing to be educated. This actually matters because when you look at schools reopening and what the impact of this will be, at least in the United States, is you're beginning to see a picture of how systems are going to react versus how parents are going to react. For example, USA Today just did a poll saying that 4 in 10 parents are opposing returning to school unless there's a vaccine. 1 in 5 teachers are saying they're not going to return unless there's even if there's a vaccine, they're not going to return this fall. So there's a significant impact on what's happening and transition from what the traditional schooling is. That's not even considering the dramatic budgetary problems that our states and local districts face. If just 30% of the kids currently in non-public schools migrate back to public schools, as you saw in 2008, that's going to be an additional $20 billion shortfall for American public schools and American states. So you'll see state and local school districts have to spend much more on taxpayer resources to fund if the kids are going to migrate back. So it's interesting. The landscape is parents are actually are more concerned about their kids getting to school. They're more concerned about their kids getting educated. They're less concerned about the social services as opposed to the school districts. The budgets are going to face a dramatic cliff. Teachers are saying they may not even return to school. And so where do we look at that in that landscape, what the opportunities are? As we did our polling at EdChoice, one of the things we ask is, who do you trust to make good decisions for your children? Not surprisingly, 88% of the people say we trust teachers to make good decisions. But interestingly, and this may seem shocking to you all, 78% said they trust parents to make good decisions. Now, you would think that would be normal, but in America, that's actually really high, and it's at a number level of support for parent decision making that we have not seen in a while. American parents are not seen by many members of the public and by teachers as good actors in their child's education. But this crisis has actually shown that parents are to be trusted. And so that's coming out also in our polling that we have done related to how parents feel they're ready to access online instruction. We're seeing that when we ask them, how prepared did you feel? How prepared are you? How active are you in your child's online instruction? 71% of the parents that we surveyed are saying they're actually prepared. They're ready to go and they're ready to do it. This is super interesting when USA Today's poll is saying that only 3% of the families report they don't have access to the internet every day. So there's a whole conversation about what's happening versus what people are saying and what parents are experiencing. Here's where it gets super interesting. We ask if parents' opinions have changed on homeschooling as a result of the coronavirus. So we want to find out what the impact of this virus has been. And what we're finding is 52% of the families we talk to, or the people we talk to, report that they're more favorable towards homeschooling, and only 26% report they're less favorable. So this is a situation where families are seeing that they're more trusted, that they're more prepared, that they're more favorable towards homeschooling. In fact, a USA Today poll that came out that I just mentioned also said that 60% will likely continue homeschooling after the coronavirus. Now think about this, right? I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what USA Today's poll said. The reality is there is a different type of schooling. We're hearing, like in our state here, where they may not come back until there's a virus, until there's a vaccine, I mean. So if schools don't open in the fall, what's going to happen to the idea of blended and homeschool and opportunities? What you're going to see, I think, is the opportunity for families to take more control. You're going to see a conversation in the policy world of mastery versus seat time. It's more important that children learn, not that they're in a seat or in a building for a certain amount of time. You're going to see a conversation about multiple platforms, delivery of educational services via multiple platforms. Learn Everywhere is a website out there that's been fantastic. HSLDA has a fantastic website for this. You're going to see a much more personalized delivery of education, and that's the opportunity. And I think what's happening is that's because we're unbundling all the schools. We're in a situation now where the threats that we face as people who support parental options are that the system is saying we've got to do everything in a building, and the families are saying we actually got this, right? Just let us get our child educated. And it's beginning to come much more aggressively to a head, particularly when it comes to the idea that if you see these Randy Weingarten who's a head of the large union in America, will say, we don't care as much about getting our kids educated as we want all the money to make sure that their school is the center of civic society. We want the school to be the food producer, the social worker, mental health provider, the entire center of our society. And that's what they're saying now. And that's not what parents are saying. So there's a huge gap between sort of parents' desires and the system. And the threats that we face, as you heard from Senator Cruz, is there are a lot of federal and as Senator Rucker knows, a lot of state legislators who are not favorable towards this cause and who have been doing everything they can to stop parents from having this freedom. I think you've also heard from Senator Cruz about the elites at Harvard not being supportive of this. And the question is as parents get more and more empowered, as they feel more and more prepared, it's going to be a situation where you're going to see a dramatic rise, in our opinion, in the ability of families to homeschool, families to control their educational environments in a way that we've not seen before. So this is great news, and thanks to groups like HSLDA who will help us have better quality control and make sure we get the right messages out there. This is a really good environment, and the polling says that it's very positive towards homeschooling in America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much to all of our speakers and to you, our attendees. We hope that this has been a helpful investment of 2 hours approximately of your time. We have certainly had a diversity of views and perspectives. No one here is asking you to agree with anyone, but we are here to provide ideas and perspectives for you to think about. Clearly, homeschooling is a global movement. It is so encouraging to see there are supporters in leadership, in influential posts in government, and in civil society. The question is, how will we react to and embrace the opportunity that this crisis has prevented? It clearly seems to be a possibility that things are going to change and stay changed for some time. Can we do better? Will we value diversity and pluralism and not demand that everything be institutional and government controlled? Will we really live up to the promise of pluralism? Will we support the idea that families and parents can be trusted to educate their children without unnecessary or unwarranted government intervention or regulation? Some people said institutions and structures fear this. Transformation is a threat to structures, and clearly this could be a threat to the existing power base of education. But homeschooling offers a solution for many people, for many parents, for many children who have been underserved by other options. And it is demonstrated, as Dr. Murphy eloquently articulated earlier, it is demonstrated that it is effective in all aspects that anyone could measure. It certainly appears that homeschooling is going to grow, and policymakers will have to confront a choice. Will you get ahead of it, or will you lag behind it? As leaders, we have an opportunity to help, to encourage, to guide and advocate people to think differently and to have a vision for education that is different from the way it's been. As Senator Cruz said, who could have imagined 6 months ago 1.5 billion children in 190 countries would be out of school, suddenly at homeschooling because of a virus? This virus is the challenge of our time, and it is a challenge, but there are opportunities that we can embrace. HSLDA was founded in 1983 to advance home education. I want you to know that we as a resource exist to serve you, parents, civil society leaders, government leaders, even including travel. I've traveled to many countries, and I hope I'll be able to travel again to other countries. I so want to get back to Brazil. But we can do much more to collaborate and support positive change, and perhaps we can do more of these Zoom meetings. And the Global Home Education Exchange was founded on the premise that every family and every child has a fundamental human right to choose homeschooling, no matter why or how they choose to do it. And this should be a common refrain we have as those who advocate for homeschooling. Government may regulate, it doesn't have to, but it may. But in any case, whether it chooses to regulate or not, it must not, it should not prohibit or prevent parents from homeschooling their children. Thank you. I wish you all the very best for you, your families, your communities, and your countries. God bless you. We're still live.